So welcome once again to everyone. If possibly some one or more people have not been at previous sessions, a special welcome to you. I also want to, at the outset, acknowledge with thanks Jan and Dr. Joan Popkin, who have sponsored this session and who are here, and delighted to have you and grateful for your commitment and generosity. This is the last of the sessions of this particular convening. And since we've been on a bit of a journey together for the last, 30 hours or so, a little more than that, I just want to very quickly refresh our memory a little bit about some of the things that we have heard in the various sessions that we have had. This will not be comprehensive, of course, but one thing that, not surprising at all to hear in this institution, is the importance of the dialectic, the importance of being able to hold ideas and commitments that are in a certain degree of tension with one another, and how important and how creative that is. I always think of one of the lines in the book of Kohelet that I've always loved, Tov asher te'achos bazeh v'gam mizeh al tanach et yadecha. It's best to be able to hold on to one thing and not drop the other, and hold on to that creative tension. So we heard that, for example, in many ways. We certainly heard it in the Rappaport lecture last night, but I'm thinking about Moshe Halbertal yesterday, who told us that first, also that there was insufficient understanding on the part of American Jews of the wrenching dilemmas of security and war that Israelis go through. At the same time, reminded us that there was insufficient will to question whether there is a line beyond which the abandonment of basic Jewish values threatens the whole meaningfulness of survival. What does it mean to survive if we can only do that, think we can only do that with running away from some of our basic values? And he was also creating that kind of, and mapping out that kind of tension. I loved when Peter Geffen at the last session talked about the pedagogical challenges of that, and testified from his own experience that when you give people not only the good news, but also some of the not so good news, and give them a more honest and more realistic picture of who they are, what our tradition is, what our people do, what the Jewish state does, that it doesn't create alienation, as he put it, it creates trust. They know they're being talked to honestly. And one of the things I think that's been hovering over this is how important talking about Zionism, which is always centers you in Israel, but talking about the diaspora community, and particularly the premier one here in North America, how important it is to recognize that very, very soon, it's really in a sense already the case. We talk about, about 47% now of Jews in the world live in Israel. It will not so long from now, be 50% and more, that the face of Judaism in Israel is going to be the face of Judaism to the world. And makes all these issues of pluralism and the ability to think not only linearly, but in this kind of dialectic, so important. And there was a very interesting debate, the last thing I'll say as a reminiscence, so to speak, a very interesting debate on how far pluralism can and should go. I'm looking at Yishar Hess, who was one of the interlocutors on this. Some of you know that I myself was victimized by some of the people who were, unwilling to even consider any other views other than their own, by having my reputation attacked because of my association with the New Israel Fund. And they even went after members of my synagogue board because of their association with me. That's how many steps removed it can get. And now the question is it incumbent on me to engage with such people, right? And that was an interesting debate that took hold yesterday as well. So against all of that backdrop, what does the future hold for American Zionism is what we're here to to talk about, and what can the future hold. And because we're not going to answer all of these things right now, just begin to get into them, this in a sense is a preview and an invitation to part two of this that Chancellor Schwartz talked about at the very outset of this convening. April 1st and 2nd of 2025, we are already begun some planning and conceptualizing of a part two for this, which will be focused a great deal more on Israel and not primarily on North America. There's a lot more to do and a lot more to think about. So in addressing some questions, which I will lay out in a moment, where we'd like all of you to be thinking, and certainly for our panelists to be addressing in some way, is what do we really hope that our audience is going to take away with them from this, which is necessarily incomplete, but has really begun to define an agenda. So let me introduce to you all of our panelists, and then I'm going to throw out just a number of questions that I have already shared with them and that they will be addressing in their remarks as well. So give you a sense of where, what the agenda is. So Dr. David Kramer, who is actually in the middle there, but I will turn to him first, is the Joseph J. and Dora Abel Librarian and Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. His academic focus has been on the literary analysis of rabbinic literature, rabbinic ritual, the social and religious history of Jews in late antiquity. He accepted the position of librarian in 2004. He's played a crucial role in forging policy and expanding the impact of the libraries. It is the library, its world-renowned collections and programs. And his new book is entitled Embracing Exile, The Jewish Case for Diaspora. It will appear this coming spring. Yes? Dr. Arnold Eisen, Chancellor Emeritus and Professor of Jewish Thought at JTS, one of the world's great authorities on American Judaism, the author, among other works, of Galut, Modern Jewish Reflections on a Reflection on Homelessness and Homecoming, Rethinking Modern Judaism, Ritual, Commandment, Community, and much else. During his tenure as Chancellor, JTS undertook a major project to create, guess what? Its 21st century campus, which I have had a few conversations with people marveling at what you hath wrought. Also placed significant emphasis on strengthening Jewish learning in our communities, creating programs that extend the reach of JTS's scholarship and resources beyond the campus to Jewish learners around the world, one of the important things that we are planning to do with the proceedings of this convening as well. He has served on the faculties of Stanford, Tel Aviv, Columbia Universities, and has contributed regularly to print and online media. And he is the author, most recently, of Seeking the Hiding God, a personal theological essay. Highly regarded and highly recommended. And Rabbi Joanna Samuels is the Chief Executive Officer at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, which is one of the largest Jewish community centers in the world. Serves over 3,000 people a day. Prior to joining the JCC, she was the founding executive director of the Educational Alliance's Manny Cantor Center. There she redefined the Jewish Community Center and the Settlement House for a new era. She has served as the rabbi of Congregation Habonim in New York City, where her leadership helped to revitalize the synagogue's community. She also worked as an advocate, strategist, and mentor for women's advancement and gender equity in the Jewish community at Advancing Women Professionals and the Jewish Community. She has written for local and national publications as well, taught at many institutions throughout New York City. She is a magna cum laude graduate of Barnard College and an ordainee from Jewish Theological Seminary, where she was also a Wexner Graduate Fellow. So here are just a couple of questions. It was long taken for granted in the experience of most of us that Zionism was an ideology with a firm, if diverse, future. So what I asked the panelists to be thinking about and addressing is, based on the various ways in which they have had their experiences in the Jewish world and their observations, what are the factors and events that have led to the point of our needing to ask what the future of Zionism is, and whether it perhaps even has a future at all? How their visions of Zionism have come into their work will, of course, be part of this. Second question, is Zionism to be taken for granted as part of a committed Jewish life? We used to think so, I think, most of us, but each of us, and our panelists for sure, have had encounters with Jews, and especially young Jews, who are devoted to the study of Jewish texts. They're devoted to the observance of Jewish mitzvot. Some of them are indifferent to Zionism. Some of them even averse to it. How did that happen? What is your understanding of what created a divergence of Jewish and Zionist commitments, and how much does it concern you? And finally, you know, to use the term Zionist and to ask someone, are you or are you not a Zionist, is in a sense to ask a binary question. It's kind of a digital question, so to speak. So the question is, could we perhaps engage Jews more effectively by, instead of using that term, inviting a much more analog debate across a big spectrum about Israeli policies and actions? Israel exists, it's going to be here, there are going to be opinions about Israeli policies. Is that a better strategy than constantly talking about, are you a Zionist or are you not, and creating those kinds of litmus tests? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kramer and ask him to speak with us about this.
Okay, hello all. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. I want to begin by saying that I've been really encouraged and often thrilled by the conference, by the presentations, which have been diverse, open, and honest in ways that I've found very, very encouraging. And I'm sure that we'll continue on that path in our session right now. I also have to say that I want to thank earlier speakers for saying many of the things that I might have felt compelled to say if they hadn't come before me. But they've actually made my job a lot easier, because I can reference a few things that have already been laid down as foundation and make my comments briefer than they otherwise might have been, or focused in a particular way that they might not have been if I were trying to lay it out all in a single thesis. So I have a very simple suggestion, a simple thesis that I would like to state simply, but then give some depth to. The simple thesis is that when we talk about the future of Zionism in North America, to use the title that was given in the program, we have to make room for non-Zionism, and we have to make room even for anti-Zionism. In other words, the future of Jewish life in America will certainly, I think, reference Zionism as a category, and many people will identify, many Jews will identify, and non-Jews, of course, identify sometimes as Zionists as well. But I think it's very crucial for Jewish life in the future that we also open our arms and welcome into our communities, into our institutions, non-Zionists and anti-Zionists. Why? My answers are pragmatic, historical, and ideological. To begin with the pragmatic, there have been many people who have referenced, Gordon, this goes back even to your introductory comments yesterday, the fact that as we trace the opinions, the identities of Jews through younger and younger cohorts in North American Jewry, we find that they become less and less committed to, inspired by Israel. That's simply a reality. I'm not expressing an opinion on that, but I think we need to deal with the reality. Jack Wertheimer yesterday in his comments said that, and in one recent survey, 15% of Jewish college students identify as anti-Zionist, and 20% aren't sure. I don't know what direction those proportions will go, how they will adapt and adjust to new circumstances we face. And of course, there's always the I don't care, I don't know, none of the above category, which isn't recorded there. But certainly, even if it's only 15 or 20%, this is a significant portion of a cohort that will become more and more prominent and influential, we hope, right? Because we don't want them to exclude themselves from the Jewish community. Pragmatically speaking, if we're not open to them, we're going to be in even more trouble, right? We've got to make a home for them in our communities. Now, and actually, Gordon, you said this in your introductory remarks as well, right? I quote you, "We dare not write them off," right? Referring to these younger people. And I would even go, and I'll come back to this in a few minutes, Ruby Namdar said in a very clear and explicit way, and I will defend this, that anti-Zionist is a legitimate way of being Jewish. Okay, and therefore, and I'm going to justify that both historically and ideologically. So now to come to the history. First of all, many people have made mention of the fact that Zionism was at its origins, and certainly late 19th, but early 20th century in North America and elsewhere. Zionism was a radical movement. It understood itself that way and was very, very proud of itself as a radical secular movement that was throwing something off and owning something new. In order to appreciate the anti-Zionism of earlier times, I have here, many of you will recall this. Remember when you read The Chosen, Chaim Potok, right? Way back when. There are a number of little speeches I could have chosen, but here is Reb Saunders, right, Rosh Yeshiva and member of community, right, who's responding to the presence of Zionism amongst his students in the yeshiva. And he says, "Who are these people? Who are these people?" He shouted in Yiddish, and the words went through me like knives because, you know, the protagonist here is the one who's awakening to Zionism. He says, "Apikorsim, Goyim, Ben Gurion and his Goyim will build Eretz Yisrael. They will build for us a Jewish land. They will build Torah into this land. Goyishkeit. Goyishkeit they will bring to this land, not Torah. God will build the land, not Ben Gurion and his Goyim. When the Messiah comes, we will have Eretz Yisrael, a holy land, not a land contaminated by Jewish Goyim." That captures a lot, right? And it represents well the anti-Zionism not only of ultra-Orthodox communities, but the truth is that the anti-Zionism or the ideology that's represented here is actually not extreme at all. It may have been extreme in 1970, 1960. It wasn't extreme in the early 20th century, and it certainly wasn't extreme over the course of Jewish history when this ideology was actually traditional Jewish ideology, right? And don't be mistaken about this. If we go back to sources that created the Judaism we know, Rabbinic Judaism, the Talmud, that is, Talmud is perfectly explicit in forbidding Zionism, right? Now, it doesn't say Zionism. What it says is that Jews are forbidden to go up to the land of Israel en masse, in large numbers. Individuals, yes, as large groups, no. This was codified in halachic codifications through the ages, and this is at the foundation of the Jewish hope for the coming of the Messiah and for the resistance to Zionism, radical and secular as it was, in the late 19th and into the 20th century. I'll have another word to say about that in a minute, but I just want to now introduce history, and history and ideology do come together here. This is a wonderful book by Robert Chazen. It's called Refugees or Migrants, subtitle, Pre-Modern Jewish Population Movement. He asks about the truth. He's a historian, he passed away not long ago, was a superb historian of the Jewish Middle Ages, and based upon his earlier work, he asked the question, Jewish population movement through the ages, was it a product of oppression, persecution, anti-Semitism, and so forth, or was it sometimes something else? And his title tells you, refugees, right, that's running away, or migrants, right, that's hoping for a better life. And he says here, at one point, this is page 187, for those of you going to go look it up, almost 19 centuries elapsed between the massive governmental expulsion of Jews ordered by the Babylonian emperor Nebuchadnezzar early in the 6th pre-Christian century. So from that expulsion, the Babylonian expulsion in the early 500s BCE, 1900 years, he says, passed without any significant expulsion of Jews. No government motivated, and he comes on here, he says, between that and the first major European expulsion and decree of banishment from England enacted in 1290. It's a massive period of time. In between what happened, the lengthy period in between, devoid of governmental expulsions or significant forced population movements of any kind, hardly corresponds to the frightening portrayal of relentless forced displacements of Jews that is part of the standard, meaning more recent narrative, right? It's simply not the case. There are reasons that that notion exists, which could be explored and are worthy exploring, but it's not because it actually represents historical truth. And here I think it's very important to say that Zionism as an ideology, of course, does what all ideologies do, and that is to say, it tells stories to support, right, stories in versions to support the outcomes that it desires. So one easy way to illustrate this, we heard this earlier today, we heard it yesterday as well, right, this 2,000-year notion, the 2,000-year hope, which I find myself immensely puzzled about, the reference to Roman persecution, the expulsion of Jews at the time of the Jewish war with Rome and so forth. There was no expulsion of Jews at the time of the Roman war with Jews, right? Never happened. Rome did not have a program of expulsion. Jews continued to live in great numbers in the land of Israel, more in Galilee than in Judah, for centuries, creating things like the Midrashim, like the Talmud Yerushalmi, and so forth. And I listened, we've got in the library newly digitized records of talks that were given by seminary folks not in prior generations. And we've got a talk by Professor Saul Lieberman actually talking about how the evidence of the Talmud Yerushalmi and the experience of Jews in the land of Israel in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. And his conclusion is very simple. Outside of the brief period of the Bar Kokhba revolt, where Jews were pretty damn problematic from the perspective of Rome, there is no evidence of any kind of anti-Jewish policies on the part of Rome. When you have, after the establishment of the Christian empire, some laws that are quote-unquote anti-Jewish, they were systematically ignored. They were never enforced. This is Lieberman's presentation. Now, to go on to one other thing, and this mixes history and ideology, the truth is that the diaspora was often a wonderful place for Jewish existence. And one of the reasons for the resistance of people like Franz Rosenzweig, for example, in the earlier 20th century to Zionism as a form of Jewish nationalism is because, to be sure, with the experience of the loss of blood over the defense of territory in the First World War, but other factors as well, right? He saw Jewish life through the ages, right, in its many places as an act of nobility where we gained in our many diasporas and where our neighbors, our hosts gained as well. And here we've got two things. I read here, just to drive this home, from Samuel Usque's Consolations for the Tribulations of Israel, translated by Martin Cohn into English. This was written in Portuguese by a Sephardi Jew after the expulsion of Sephardi Jews from Spain. So this is in the 1500s. And he says the following. First of all, new home, Salonika. Okay? There is a city in the Turkish kingdom which formerly belonged to the Greeks and in our days is a true mother city in Judaism. Salonika is the mother city in Judaism. For it is established on the very deep foundations of the law, and it is filled with the choicest plants and the most fruitful trees. Right? Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. Right, but it's Salonika, presently known anywhere on the face of our globe. These fruits are divine. The walls are made of holy deeds. Right, and he goes on to say, this is our true Jerusalem. right? And then a little bit later on, in his comforting of Jews for having been expelled from Spain, he says, the most signal way by which you will rise to a higher degree of consolation, he's addressing Sephardi Jews who have been affected by the expulsion, right, is the great nation of Turkey. This country is like a broad and expansive sea which our Lord has opened with the rod of his mercy, as Moses did for you in the Exodus from Egypt, right? So going to Turkey is like escaping through the sea to the promised land. Here the gates of liberty are always wide open for you, that you may fully practice your Judaism. This is a sublime mercy from the Lord, for he has granted you such abundant freedom in these realms that you may now take the first step toward your belated repentance, right? History and ideology together. The point I'm trying to make, as I said at the beginning, is a very simple one. The history of Jewish tradition awaits the Messiah for the return to Zion. Zionism is radical, and in its radicalness, wonderful, but given the realities on the ground, given our younger cohorts and what they have experienced and what their attitudes have become and the way they are developing, I think it's absolutely essential that by the side of whatever the future of Zionism is in North America, there also be room for non-Zionist and even anti-Zionist.
Could I press him on one thing right now? Could I press him on one thing right now? Yeah, could I press him on one thing? Yeah, prerogative of the chair.
Oh.
I just want to ask you for one additional point of clarification, because you began with and actually ended with, we need to make room for non-Zionists and even anti-Zionists. What you laid out in terms of pragmatics and history and all of that seems to me to make your case for non-Zionists. But not necessarily anti-Zionists, right? That is, you don't have to be a Zionist because the diaspora is a perfectly good option.
The chosen.
Oh, Reb Saunders. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, for those who, listen, those who are not motivated by Jewish nationalism, whose only realization is seen as coming to fruition in Zion, in the land of Israel, right? And there are many young people like this, who are forming minions today, who are creating groups of support and so forth. And, I mean, they are deep, caring, committed Jews. But they find themselves with very serious problems with Zionism, and I feel, yes, they do need to have a place in our communities and institutions.
Chancellor Eisen.
Sir, so I was thinking in the course of this convening that the person who convened more seminars on the future of Zionism than anyone else that I know of was David Ben-Gurion, who loved to gather intellectuals, academics, communal leaders, sometimes in Jerusalem and sometimes elsewhere, sometimes publicly and sometimes privately, to talk about the future of Zionism. Ben-Gurion held many of these conversations literally in the middle of the night. He had a long day working as prime minister. And in the middle of the night for recreation, he would gather Sholem and Ephraim Urbach and Jacob Talmon and all the other greats of Israel to talk about the future of Zionism. And on one of these sessions, we have the transcripts, by the way, which are wonderful, and some of them are translated into English. He said to the philosopher Natan Rodenstreich that Israel has no more need of socialism and no more need of Zionism. We don't have to study the books written 50, 60, 100 years ago, don't need them at all. Israel does not need socialism, it does not need Zionism. What it needs is Messianism. Messianism, which was a message that scared the intellectuals to death because it indicated that Ben-Gurion had pretensions of greatness, which they did not welcome, right? Now, I, as a person who teaches courses in Zionist thought, I'm teaching one this very semester at JTS, I think it is helpful to read the classics, including David Ben-Gurion. But I would agree with Ben-Gurion that the question now and the question for this convening is not whether we continue a tradition of thought, but how we can persuade Jews to have a close relationship to a living, breathing, imperfect, remarkable state of Israel. How do we do this in the United States in the decades going forward? And that's the question that I'm going to address right now. This conference, this convening has the word Zionism in the title, but from my point of view, what it really is about, it's really about Israel. Right? We're talking about Israel here. Now, I'm going to do a couple things in the next few minutes. I'm going to give a personal vision. I don't believe there can be one kind of Zionism for reasons I'm going to tell you. I think there's got to be several. I'm going to give you some highlights of mine. And I'm also going to try to draw threads, as Gordon Tucker did in his introduction. I'm going to try to draw a few threads from what we've heard in the last couple of days into my talk, but you should recognize that this is entirely my point of view. I do not speak here as the Chancellor Emeritus of the Jewish Theological Seminary. I do not speak here for the conservative movement. I speak here for me, only for me. And the first thing I want to say is that we often make a mistake when we talk about relationship to Israel in letting it be thought that we're interested here in an opinion. And I want to say that the relationship to Israel which we seek is not an opinion, like the opinion one has on the war in Ukraine, or whether the Federal Reserve Board should lower the cost of lending interest. This is not an opinion. It's not an opinion for me. I don't think we want it to be an opinion for American Jews. I'll talk about that more in a second. But we're talking about a passion. We're talking about a love. We're talking about a personal connection where you can't imagine yourself being the person that you are and want to be without a connection to the state of Israel. And that's certainly where I'm at. And this always has personal biographical roots. Right? Zionism for me, and for many Jews of my generation, the relationship to Israel for us, was a meeting between who we were and wanted to be at a certain point in our biographies, and who the state of Israel, what the state of Israel was at that particular point. For me, it happened when I went to do graduate work in Jerusalem in 1975, 2 years after the Yom Kippur War, and I fell in love not only with the reality, but even more with a project. I came to Israel because I was in love with a project. And as I remember it, there are three sources of this emerging love for this project. One was the book of Deuteronomy. I recently, when I moved offices and left the Chancellor's office, I found a lot of files I had never seen before in 30 years. And one of them was a paper that I wrote in 1975, a 90-page essay on the book of Deuteronomy. I forgot completely by the year after that I'd written this essay, but you can see in this paper that the 25-year-old me is thrilled with the notion of the Jewish people building something new in that place, unlike anything that had been built before. There was something revolutionary, something idealistic. And this coincided with my reading of sociologists like Peter Berger, who are convincing me that in America it's very difficult to live according to Jewish values because the dominant culture is so powerful and imposes its values and its symbols on you. We don't have what Berger called the plausibility structure, and I thought of Israel as the plausibility structure for the Jewish people. The third reason, though, that impelled me there was friendship. And I think for many of us, of my generation, our love for Israel is bound up with our love of people, whether family or friends. And I, because I did my graduate work there, something like half of the people I most love in the world are Israelis who've chosen to either go there or they were born there and decided to stay there. And so for me, when I think about Israel, I don't think about governments or policies. I think about people, and I want to be with these people. They're my friends. I love them. And I feel obligated to them. I have some responsibilities to them. I want to support them. So for me, Zionism going forward shouldn't be a relationship with an abstraction called the State of Israel. If you have a vision of what Judaism should be, what this Deuteronomy or whatever else your key texts are, what do you want Jewish life to be? I want to stand with the people who are fighting for that vision to make it real. And therefore, if the government's going to screw it up, and the government's going to contradict Jewish ideals, and the government's going to have fascists in its ranks, et cetera, That's not cause for abandoning Zionism, that's cause for buckling down and fighting with the people who are fighting the good fight. And so Zionism now means that we're joining with those people in that battle, right? So that's the first thing about my Zionism. Then the second thing is that we can't expect everybody to sign on to my view of Zionism, first of all, because as I learned Schwartz yesterday, so a lot of the battles we have about Zionism are really battles about Judaism. And David Kramer just alluded to this. I have Jews whose views of Judaism I profoundly disagree with. Some of them are on my quote left, some of them are on my quote right, some of them say that I'm completely illegitimate for one reason or another. And their Zionisms also are not going to agree with mine. And so our battle is not so much about Israel, it's also about Israel, of course, but it's about the nature of Judaism. And that's a battle we have to fight because we're in this. I care deeply about the survival of Torah, and the people who present Torah to me and to the young people, to my kids, and to their kids now, my grandchildren, they present Judaism in ways that I find repellent, offensive, disgusting. They're threatening the tradition that I care about so much. So I have to fight with those people about Judaism, and I have to fight with those people about Israel. But there's a second reason now why there have to be lots of Zionisms, and that's because it is so generational. And David alluded to this, many of the people, the speakers in this conference have alluded to it. It's not only that these people growing up are different. I mean, I love being in the classroom at JTS, and I'm the only one with books and a pen in the classroom. Everybody else, right, exactly. Kramer and I were showing our age, right? And I stay away from social media. I really can't do it. I don't know how to do it. And that's what's determinative. And it's a different biography. It's a different Israel, a totally different Israel than the one I fell in love with. And it's a different America. So to be an American and a Jew right now is different than it was when I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, and then in my 20s and the 1970s. It's a different America. So that combination of American and Jew and Zionist, by definition, has to be a different thing. And if we don't understand that, we're not going to reach people. So it could be that people of my generation, I'll include David in this generation and Gordon, maybe we're not the people to supply this vision. We may be the wrong people to supply the vision of Judaism or the vision of Zionism. And there's a third reason why we have to have more than one kind of American Zionism, and that's because most Jews in America don't know very much either about Israel or about Judaism. Let's face it. This is what we're dealing with. So if consistently on the surveys over the decades, if you ask American Jews, how closely connected are you to Israel? How much do you care about Israel? And consistently in survey after survey, 30% or something like 30% says, I'm not connected at all. And only another 30% says, I feel very connected. This rises at time of crisis, like the moment, but most of the time it's not more than that. And the 40% in the middle says, I'm somewhat attached. What does that mean, to be somewhat attached? And we also know that there's a huge correlation between the group that is marginally attached to Israel and the group that's marginally attached to Judaism. So if only 40% of the Jews in the United States belong to anything Jewish right now, 60% of the so-called American Jewish community doesn't belong to anything Jewish. Maybe they get some stuff on the web, and in private, they might be Jewish, but publicly? So this is a problem to get across Zionism to this kind of group, and therefore, the kind of Zionism that spoke so powerfully to me and speaks so, I can't do without it. I'm not me without a connection to the state of Israel. We have to devise a different kind of Zionism for these kinds of Jews. How are we going to connect them, if at all, the state of Israel, given all the other problems that we've already named, namely what the reality is in the United States, what the reality is in the state of Israel, how are we going to do this? And we can't not do this because I'm of the opinion, it's an opinion, you can't prove it, that the state of Israel has been necessary for the renaissance of Judaism in this country. Couldn't have happened without it. And the vitality and existence of the state of Israel as a place where Jews can be proud of is necessary to the continued success of Judaism in this country. And that's even more true for Judaisms around the world, which have less resources than ours. So what do we have going for us in this regard? Well, I want to say the first thing we have going for us, Mati Lazar talked about this morning, is that for most American Jews, Israel is a myth. It's not a reality. They know very little about Israel, and they haven't wanted to know more. They haven't taken the trouble to learn. So I think in the most recent surveys, it's still true that only less than 50% of American Jews have ever been to Israel at once, and a large percentage of the Jews who have ever been to Israel traveled abroad. So they've chosen not to go to Israel, right? They don't want to go. Do they read Hebrew literature and translation? Ruby Namdar is absolutely correct. No, they do not read Hebrew literature and translation. It's hard to learn Hebrew as an adult, but have most Jewish adults taken care that their kids learn Hebrew as children? No. So we haven't taken the steps that would be necessary if this community were serious about a relationship to Israel. We've taken the steps that are necessary to not have that relationship be a serious relationship. And for many Jews, I'm going to say this crassly, I'm not the author of this expression, but I think it's probably true. For many Jews in America, their Judaism, their Jewishness, is a leisure time activity. It's not at all at the center of their lives. It's something peripheral, it's something marginal. But I don't think it's true that Israel doesn't matter. And I also don't think it's true that Israel has taken the place of Judaism for a large number of American Jews. What I think is true is that there is a myth of Israel which has been necessary to American Jewish well-being, and the expression of that Israel is Am Yisrael Chai. Israel is, for American Jews, life after death of the Holocaust. This is Acharei Mot Kedoshim. This is Israel of life fighting death. And all the symbols of Israel, the images of Israel, which are so popular among American Jews, which are cliches, which are kitsch, like Exodus and Paul Newman and all of this. That's life against death. That's those DPs. And making the deserts bloom, right? There were blooming fields before, right? Ahad Am talked about this in his essay, Emet Me'eretz Israel from 1891. There are Palestinians there who are making deserts bloom, but we made the deserts bloom because we needed to have a myth of life after death. And I think that even the high-tech revolution, even the startup nation, this is life against death. So you have a myth, and the civil religion of American Jews has been life against death. And the question now on the table is, has October the 7th destroyed the power of this myth? There's no doubt it's damaged its power, because what October the 7th represents is death. This is death. Death to kibbutzim, death to people, violating these horrible atrocities. This is death. But there is an expression in the scholarship about religion of broken myth, and I think that what we have right now is a broken myth. It's not a destroyed myth, it's a broken myth. I think we have to recognize that the myth of Am Yisrael Chai remains powerful. It may even be more necessary for American Jews than it was before October the 7th, because we need to know that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, is not going to die, the state of Israel is not going to die. Moshe Halbertol, who I respect immensely, said he endorses the notion that Israel's wars right now are a war of, they're existential battles. They're about the survival. These are not luxurious wars like the 1982 fight in Lebanon. These are not, right? These are existential battles which you have to fight. One can disagree, as he said, about the way the war is conducted, but he stands by the necessity to fight an existential battle because it's life against death. So what are we going to do about this? How are we going to go forward? And I'm going to say one word about each of the three kinds of Zionism, which I mentioned in the earlier panel, political Zionism, and religious Zionism, and cultural Zionism. And we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to basically make these points in shorthand, and I make them in the context of this conversation, this room, which I think is a wonderful thing. I have to say I'm so pleased that JTS did this. I think it's essential for Jews to be able to have honest conversations, and the conversation we've had here over the past 2 days, as David said, has been remarkable in its frankness and its honesty, and you can only do that when you get people together in a room in a place like this. So the first thing I want to say is that let's be a little more mature about the way we educate teenagers and college students and adults of all ages about Israel. So I'm a big fan, very influenced by the great sociologist Max Weber. The great Max Weber wrote a very famous essay called Politics as a Vocation. And on the top of the second page of Politics as a Vocation, he says, quoting Trotsky, all states are founded on force. Every state is founded on force. And Israel is a state, and when Ben-Gurion and the others signed the Declaration of Independence, it's a well-known story, there was dancing in the streets, and Ben-Gurion is not dancing, because he's got the estimate from the chief of staff of his army that chances are only 50-50 that Israel is going to survive the Arab onslaught, which is about to happen. He knew his state was founded on force. And there's a wonderful book by the historian Anita Shapira called Land and Power, where she traces the recognition in the Zionist movement, first of all, that there's Arabs here, we have to relate to these Arabs, and second of all, that they don't want us here, and what kind of force are we going to use? And she traces the battle between those who want to use what was called the defensive ethos, as opposed to those who want to use the offensive ethos. But we've got to educate American Jews, it's not a fairy tale here. We've got a state, and it uses force. And American Jews are not comfortable with this notion that there's power. And we're lying to ourselves, as someone said yesterday. What, you're enjoying your life as a college student on an American campus? You don't know that you're protected by the American imperial umbrella, which enables you to buy the shirt you buy for only $19.95 because the people who made it in the third world are getting paid a pittance? Grow up. Grow up. Recognize the political world. But as Moshe Halbersol said yesterday, so I don't have to say it here, there's so much injustice done. So to say that the state is founded on force and we're going to use power does not mean that every use of the power is okay. Which means that if we American Jews are going to stand behind this state of Israel and recognize that its power is necessary, we also have to stand up and raise our voices and say, no, this use of power is not justified. And I know that it's hard to do that. And it's going to be harder after October the 7th because my cousin's kids, my friends' kids, are out there fighting in Gaza, and my kids are not. But on the other hand, we know that they in Israel are not seeing the footage of what's happening in Gaza that we are seeing. And they all say, I heard it again from Israelis Friday night, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. I can't feel sorry with those people. They killed so many of us, et cetera, et cetera. So what is our job? And I think that a mature American Zionism politically is going to say, we've got to help you think about these issues. We're not just going to sit back and say, this is your problem. They're doing it in our name. They're doing it in my name. They're doing it in the name of Judaism. My Judaism is at stake here because, as I've said, when David and I were dialoguing in Anshe Chesed, I got to laugh about this, Shuli. I said, I was shocked to find out that Bibi Netanyahu has more influence on the public's perception of Judaism than the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And it's sad, but true. So what does the world think of Judaism? Judaism is now what the state of Israel does. That's what Judaism is. And we can't sit back and not speak up when the state of Israel does all these things, but we also can't be naive and believe that we can have a living, breathing state of Israel without an army. Second thing, cultural Zionism. Ahad Am was clear that Israel had to be a moral force in the world, and I agree with that, bearing in mind everything I've just said about the use of power. We have to be a moral force in the world. We have to balance these two things. But I want to say that to be a Zionist now, as Ahad Am understood it, involves several kinds of pluralism, which is a major contribution of American Jews to the lexicon. A lot of the great anthropologists and philosophers who've dealt with pluralism have been Jews, not coincidentally. And it is wrong for us to be pluralists when it comes to America, but not pluralists when it comes to Israel. Just like it's wrong for us to say that Gentiles should tolerate Jews and respect Jews when Jews don't tolerate and respect one another. Can't do it that way. It can't work. So one of the kinds of pluralism we have to have is pluralism between Israelis and American Jews. So the great Zionists in the United States have quietly or loudly denounced the anti-diaspora mainstream theme of almost all Israeli Zionists. I can show you Israeli Zionists who disagree about everything. The one thing they agree upon from the left to the right is negation of the diaspora. That you and I are living in illusion, that we have no future, and that ultimately what we're living here is worthless. Which of course the message Aleph Bet Yeshua gave to the American Jewish Committee at its centenary, and he made waves for this. But the commentaries in Israel, which I invite you to read, mostly said he was impolite, he shouldn't have said it, but he was correct. I heard Amos Oz with my own ears say to me at a meeting in San Francisco that you Jews in America, this is a museum. You're keeping alive a dead culture. There's nothing alive in your Judaism. Amos Oz said this, a man who's very smart and should know better. But this is an expression of a kind of Zionism that I think we should no longer be polite about. We are American Jews. We are proud of our Judaism. We are giving you our support because we cannot not give you our support. We're going to relate to you, but we're not going to put up with this nonsense of this kind of wholesale negation of the diaspora anymore. The second thing we're going to have is pluralism toward non-Jews. Let's admit it. There's a lot of disrespect of non-Jews that goes on in the Jewish community. There's some racism. There's certainly a lot of ethnic pride, not pride, bias. And I was going to say that we need, in our outreach to non-Jews, to include the non-Jews who live in the state of Israel. It's wrong for the American Jewish community to have a live connection with the state of Israel and not relate to the 20% of that population who don't happen to be Jews. We're connecting to Israel here. And we believe in pluralism. And just as we spend a lot of time on interfaith relations in the United States, we need to pay some attention, a lot of attention, to the non-Jews who are living in the state of Israel and see them as an integral part of the state that we love. That's part of the state that we love. Final thing I want to say about that question, Gordon, I'm 2 minutes away from finishing. One of the things, good, I'll do Ruby's example. You didn't say anything? Okay, I'll keep going. One of the lessons I learned at the Hebrew University in 1975 that made me a lifelong lover of the state of Israel was an approach to Jewish life that was taught by the great professor Eliezer Schweig. And every student who studies with me at JTS is treated to my story of how I learned from Eliezer Schweig the following lesson: that all of modern Jewish thought is concerned overwhelmingly with two questions. The first is political. Where are Jews going to find places to stand in the modern world? In the previous pre-modern world, you knew where you stood. You were either in a Christian or a Muslim civilization. You were second class in both of them, but you were tolerated in most times. But where are you going to live in the modern world? That's the first question, the political question. The second question is the theological, religious, cultural question. What kind of Judaisms can you develop that are suitable to these places where Jews can actually live? And the sobering thought that Schweig left me with, remember, it's 1975, 2 years after the state of Israel was almost destroyed in the Yom Kippur War. Schweig says what you have to know is that both of these strategies are dangerous. Both of these strategies are risky. Because in America, the best diaspora case, you're putting your bet on the Constitution to protect you, but we all know that the interpretation of the law depends on power and economic clout and political sorts of stuff. A couple bad Supreme Court decisions could sink us as a Jewish community, right? But Schweig understood 2 years after the Yom Kippur War, the state of Israel is also a risky strategy because you're dependent on your army to protect you, and that army can't protect you all alone, as we've just seen in recent weeks. That army has to secure support from other powers, and if that support is not forthcoming, you don't survive. So here you are as a Jew in the 21st century, and both of the viable options for your viability and thrive are not free of risk, So I take this to heart, and I think that our job, therefore, is to do what we can to support both options, and that just as Schweig said, the theological and the political come together. To my mind, the theological and political have to come together in the United States of America in our Jewry. I want to say one word in conclusion about religious Zionism. Go back to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was no dummy. Ben Gurion understood the importance of messianism. He gave that remark to Natan Rothschildt in 1957. Gershom Scholem, the next year, wrote one of the most magnificent essays in modern Jewish scholarship called The Messianic Idea in Judaism. And it concludes with 2 pages I recommend to all of you, where he says that Zionism grows out of messianic longing. Zionism would not exist without messianism, and because of that, Zionism is very dangerous. The danger is that people are going to take messianism too seriously, as we've seen people do in the state of Israel, as we see people do right now. And then Arthur Hertzberg came out with the best anthology about Zionist thought which has ever come out, called The Zionist Idea, and his 100-page introduction, which is a masterpiece, says the most important idea for understanding Zionism is not nationalism, it is messianism. And I just want to say that when we say in our schools, all of us, that Israel is Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu, what are we saying? In what sense is Israel the beginning of the flowering of our redemption? Is there any other flowering of our redemption? How seriously you want to take this? And I just want to, one of the crises that's taking place in the land of Israel right now, I've heard this with my own ears from Israelis who are expressing it, is this is a messianic enterprise. How can God let us down like this? How can God let October 7th to happen? We're the chosen people. This is the chosen land. This project is God's project. I would argue this is a very dangerous and short-sighted theology. And those of us who know something about Judaism, like Hertzberg and Sholem, to do what we can to correct it. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone on this panel is on a very real level of practitioner, but Rabbi Samuels, who I'm turning to now, has by far the greatest experience of very kind of retail, practice with Jews in the communities that she has led, and in the 3,000 people that she serves every day at the JCC. So it's a real pleasure to be able to turn to her now to get some of her thoughts about all of these questions.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be brief. I'm so aware, being an observant Jew, that I live inside of a story. And that story is the story of Judaism, which is that from some moment on Friday to some moment on Saturday night, there are things that I can and cannot do. And then there are weeks in the year that I walk around my neighborhood with potholders on my hands, holding a tray of lasagna to eat in a prefabricated booth in my friend's backyard on my block, and so on, that I live inside of a story. And so I want to look at the fact that we are critiquing Israel, and I want to really validate, Arnie, what you said, that we're not talking about Zionism, we're talking about Israel, right? That we are both critiquing it as a nation state and as a story. And that feels very complicated to me, because I want to talk about another story that we tell ourselves that helps me to get a little bit of distance from the moments when I feel disappointed in the actions of the state of Israel, or I question them, or I wonder what's coming forward. And I want to share with everyone that there's a place about 1 mile from where we are sitting right now. That place is called the Bronx. The Bronx has a poverty rate for children of 40%. In general, the poverty rate there is about 33%, and that has not changed in about 40 years. What is a poverty rate? A poverty rate says that a family of 4 in New York City lives with an income of under $30,000. Just think about that for a minute. And so 40% of the children who live 1 mile from here live in a society that is failing them. More than 50% of the people who live in the Bronx, I think it's about 59%, are not naturalized US citizens. It means they don't vote. And I say all of this because we live in this complicated, broken, maybe anachronistic, and certainly not meeting the needs of the moment philosophy called democracy. The story we tell ourselves is that we live in a democracy, and that democracy is the right system and the best system. It may well be, right? From the earliest days, you have de Tocqueville from the right saying democracy is not a good system because the mob is going to rule. From the left, more recently, you have historians like Howard Zinn who say, yeah, but it's great that people vote, but there's still all of this inequality, and so we need a much more active sense of democracy, a much more active experience. And having spent, before coming to the JCC, 9 years working in a low-income community, just 3 miles from here, I can say that the systems that we live in are basically as good as the stories we tell about them. It should be shameful to every one of us that 1 mile from here, children do not have enough to eat. Full stop. It should be shameful. Why aren't we doing more about it? Why aren't we overthrowing the government? Why aren't we demanding in the streets that this change? We ought to be. It is a moral crisis. And so now I want to turn to Zionism. And I want to say that the democracy example helps me to understand why Zionism is both necessary and why it's not yet perfect. Because when we live inside of stories that we tell ourselves and we live inside of systems that benefit us, while a whole bunch of other people who are 1 mile from us don't have those rights and don't have that access, it's very hard to make change in our day-to-day lives. And I have found myself since October 7th feeling, Arnie, that we less need to talk about the ambivalences that we have towards the state of Israel and the complexities, and more about giving people the reason why they ought to support it in the first place. I am a generation younger than you, and I have been surrounded in my education by ambivalence, by questioning, by critique, by the constant need to be looking over our left shoulder for who's being excluded and who's being offended. And that has also gotten us to where we are. When we wonder why are the people that we are teaching and the people in our communities so thinly connected to Jewish life, it's because we're not delivering a positive message of how life-changing it is to be engaged in the spiritual, religious, and ethical lives that we are so blessed to be living within. Why is Chabad so successful? I think about this all the time because I have a child on a college campus. And I want to just say that if 15% of college students are anti-Zionists, I am telling you that 15% of college students also think that you should be able to smoke marijuana all day. To me, it's like a kind of okay.
15%?
Yeah, I mean, it's okay, they think that, and I wonder, are they going to think that in 10 years? There's something about college students where we are over-determining, actually, what their perceptions are and what they mean for us. Having said that, why is Chabad successful? Why are they kicking our butts on college campuses? Why is Chabad growing on college campuses and Koach no longer exists? Right? What Chabad represents is pure joy and love for Judaism and the Jewish people. And you know what? we have learned to also say, oh, by the way, but they're racist. Oh, by the way, but they're exclusive. Shame on us. They love the Jewish people and they love Judaism. And if we could figure out how to radiate the kind of generosity and commitment and clarity that they have about this incredible Yerusha that we have, with inclusion, with egalitarianism, and all of the things that make our communities reflect a high sense of morality, we would be in much better shape. And I think the same thing about Israel. I think that if we could just talk about, it is a freaking miracle that that country was created. It is an unbelievable place, and we should be so proud of it. In the same way that we should be proud to be Americans, we should be proud to be New Yorkers, even though we live in a city where 1 mile from here, things are really a disaster. So I think what I want to say is that given the fact that we all live in a story, I want to tell a different story. I want to tell a story that is about pride and is about love and connection and peoplehood, that means that when I'm criticizing the war, I cannot for 1 minute forget that my family members are serving in that war, and they're not bloodthirsty, and they're not committing war crimes. They're living in a system and a story that is the only one that they have. And I also don't want to forget for 1 minute what is happening in the name of the state of Israel and the Jewish people in this moment. And I want to be able to say those things plainly and without ever stopping the love and the pride that I feel for what it means to be part of the Jewish people. When I think about what it means, this idea that anti-Zionists, non-Zionists, whatever, I think what I can't get past is that it feels so mean-spirited to me. It feels so mean-spirited to say, I am removing myself from the Jewish story of this moment in a way that empowers those who hate me because I am Jewish. And if that sounds old-fashioned and rah-rah, that's where I'm at. And so what I want to just say to all of us is, what would it mean to remove some of the reflexive ambivalence that we express, and in its place, wholeheartedly and with a full voice, express the love that we can express?
Thank you.
So our thanks to all three of you. I think one of the things that we have heard, in addition to all the very well thought out ideas, is a lot of the heart and a lot of the mind coming together in all of these presentations about where we are going. And so in the time that we have left, you might imagine I have lots of things that I would want to ask, but I really think it's important for you to be able to ask questions now in the time that we have left. This is our last session. But just as a prelude to that, and I hope we can do this very quickly, I had mentioned at the beginning, and actually it was Rabbi Samuels who gave me this suggestion to say, what are you hoping that people take away from this? Without just repeating what you just said, to think a little more about what kind of mood do you want people to take with them? What kind of mixture of optimism and realism do you want them to take with it, away with it, and with them? And then we'll open it up to questions. So maybe we'll go in reverse order, because I see you nodding, Joanna. So maybe you'll say a little bit about it, and then I'll ask Arnie and then David.
People say to me all the time, your job must be so hard. And the secret is that it's actually not hard at all. I mean, It's hard in all the ways that you could imagine it's hard, right? But what's not hard is being present for the Jewish people and the Jewish community in this moment. That is a blessing and a gift. And the more that we can show love and support and optimism and hope to the people in our communities, the sooner I believe that the trauma that we're all facing that has led us, so many of us, to move in this direction politically or that direction politically, and all of the kind of back and forth and ping pong of like, wait, now I'm a Republican, now I'm a leftist, like now I'm a whatever, right? The more we can just show the love and richness of our tradition, the more we are going to recover as a people, right? And then we will be better able to deploy ourselves to face the challenges that are ahead. And so I want to say this is a moment not of pretending that we all agree. We don't, right? That's okay. Who cares, right? But it is a moment of showing tremendous, tremendous love and support to our community and to each other.
Two very brief things. The fact that I can't imagine a solution to the Palestinian conflict right now, and that no one I've ever read seems to be able to imagine it, does not mean the one won't be found. The one that will be found is one that we cannot imagine right now.
Yes, yes.
Secondly, this building is a place of hope, because when you spend your life training a new generation of people who've decided to give their lives to being leaders of the Jewish people, you don't despair, quite the opposite. You say, we are in the chain, we're links in the chain, and we're going to pass this on, and somebody else is going to run with it, and that's fine. So you work in this building, you don't live without hope, and I feel that way about the Jewish people, because the same thing is true in the state of Israel. My wife likes to say that there are more wonderful people per square inch in the state of Israel than any other place on earth.
Amen.
And that's been my experience as well. So the amount of idealism and determination and grit and kindness that one sees, okay, it's amazing. And one comes to take it for granted for a while, but as Joanna says, it's quite miraculous. And therefore, one doesn't have despair, one has hope.
Yeah, well, I mean, my thesis sentence is a direct response to the question, what do you want people to go away with the willingness, the openness, the recognition that it's essential that we also make room for non-Zionists in the future that we're moving forward to. I mean, the other thing I hope people would go away with, and I just touched on this briefly, but what I would say is read my book when it comes out. When it comes out, and this goes back to a former chancellor of JTS, Gerson Cohn, right, who gave a magnificent address to the graduating class of Boston's Hebrew College in 1966, I think it was.
66, yeah.
Right, called The Blessings of Assimilation. Right, and if you look at that essay, and I encourage you to, it's an absolutely magnificent essay, and this was a historian whose scholarship is unimpeachable on these matters. You could just as easily have changed the title of the talk to The Blessings of Diaspora, because I mean, what he was arguing for was both the abundant experience of richness and enhancement that Jews have experienced in diaspora, even with hardships. There is no human community anywhere in their own land or in the land of others that does not experience hardship, right? And we see that around the world all the time. But I would want us, now the takeaway, I hope the takeaway is that as important as Israel is, and I agree, it's extremely important, it is central to our being, to our identity, and so forth. I wish I could forget about Israel, because I would have had a lot less angst over the course of the last year, right? I wish I could, certain apps that I could get rid of on my phone, but I hope that at the same time we go away with the recognition that the importance of Israel should not come with our abandonment of commitment to building, strengthening an already strong community, I believe, that is to say the community of the diaspora. The Jewish people has been, more Jews during more periods of time have lived in diaspora than ever in the land of Israel. And we have created a magnificent civilization in our multiple diasporas, and it would be a tragedy if we were to give up on that.
I can't resist one thing since you mentioned the late Chancellor Cohn, that he used to talk about how he grew up in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and his parents would not speak to him in any other language other than Hebrew. and he had to learn English later on, and was teased, by his friends for being deficient in English. But boy, he had great Hebrew. So questions?
Hi, thank you. This is a wonderful conference and a wonderful panel. I'm a member of a congregation that I don't know if it's big, but it's diverse in terms of the opinions of the congregants. And I know a rabbi does speak occasionally on current events, but always in a way that, let's say, hamevin yavin. And I know that he has opinions that he does not fully express. How should our leaders in diverse communities like my own, how should they address issues that could be controversial, like the war now in Gaza and other issues?
Yeah. First of all, it is very hard to be a congregational rabbi right now. It's like right up there with like university president. And so I would hesitate to give any advice to any of the rabbis. I will just tell you, I teach a weekly class at the JCC, and the Wednesday after Rosh Hashanah, there must have been 10 Manhattan synagogues represented among the people sitting around the table. And it turns out nobody's rabbi gave the right sermon, right? And we know these rabbis, they're great, right? So I think it's just really hard. And I wonder what it looks like to even enter a conversation with your rabbi that says, what is it that you need from us as a community right now as we're navigating this really difficult time? My guess is that that rabbi would say something like, I need us to all just take a deep breath. I need us to love each other in this community. I need you to give me the benefit of the doubt. I need you to know that I'm going to say something and it's going to just be like a kind of laser beam into your brain that's going to create pain, and I don't mean to. I need you to know that you are all triggered right now by everything going on in the world, and so am I. And so maybe out of this, what gets developed is a relationship of greater honesty and partnership between that person who stands over there and reads those magic words, every Shabbat and every Chag, and something that is more like, how do we navigate this time of great difficulty together?
Yeah.
Hi.
You got to get the attention of the people with the microphones. Yes.
Over here.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much. Really wonderful panel. All of the presentations really inform my question, which I'm going to direct toward Professor Kramer. Totally on board with everything that you said about, I love the myth busting that you provided, and on board with about broadening the conversation to include anti-Zionism or anti-Zionists and non-Zionists in the Jewish story. But one other unprecedented fact that exists today, similar to all the generations that Professor Chazen mentions in his book, is that at approximately half of world Jewry lives in the land of Israel today, in the state of Israel today. It seems to me that every conversation within the Jewish community about the Jewish future must take account of that fact, which is also similarly unprecedented. So my question is, even if we frame the conversation as one of including Zionists, anti-Zionists, non-Zionists, in the way that Reb Saunders talks about it, this community is one that is living in a state of perpetual sin, which is similar to how much of the left kind of thinks of it currently. So how do you envision a conversation that contains all of these elements being fruitful, that takes account of that very fact that so many of our brethren live there? And I'll just to make it a little bit more pointed, here we are having a conversation about their damn community thousands of miles away. And I think it would be fair for them to consider that to be rather obtuse. And so I wonder how we can have a fruitful conversation that includes all of those different perspectives while taking seriously the fate of that community, because it's not just a conversation about Zionism per se or Zionists. It's a conversation about the reality of the existence of Israel.
I'm not sure I understand the force of your question. I mean, when you said they're living, I assume that meant Israelis living in Israel, the Zionist state, that they're living in sin according to Reb Saunders. Did I understand you correctly? Yeah. Okay, so if that's what you meant, that's obviously a very small proportion of the Jewish community as a whole, though I think that their opinion needs to be respected. I drive back from the Catskills with some frequency, and there's a billboard on the side of Route 17, New York Route 17, that announces in Yiddish that Israel, Zionism, is sinful in the opinion of the great Gedolim, right? So you're certainly touching on something important, but it's obviously a very small number. I was addressing North America, and for me, I mean, if you look at North American anti-Zionism, overwhelmingly, it's not Reb Saunders' community, some of which, of course, lives in Jerusalem and other places in Israel, but not under the Zionist umbrella as they understand it. But it's people who see there as being what we might describe as an original sin of Zionism, or a not so original but ongoing sin of Zionism, or an original sin for nationalism. I mean, nationalism, right, with all of its benefits, is also a very problematic construct. And when you add religion to nationalism, right, religious nationalism is, you referenced several, of writers on this, it's potentially very, very dangerous, right? So even if we disagree with them, and I disagree with people in that position, I personally disagree, but I also want to understand the wisdom of their position. And they do have a wisdom. And it's worth our hearing the wisdom, because I believe it will correct us, right? If someone says that religious nationalism is potentially very dangerous because of what it leads to, right? I can reject that in the case of Israel or elsewhere, but it's also, I think, worthwhile to ask why. Well, what's the intelligence of that perspective, and how do we ensure that the danger they're identifying is not something we fall victim to, right? Meaning become the perpetrators of, right? So that's the way I would respond.
Would it be fair to say, I think it is fair to say, because I've heard you talk about this, that you have to filter, so to speak, the anti-Zionism in the following sense. One could be an anti-Zionist thinking this was just a real mistake. This was not a good idea for there to be a Jewish state. It's really destructive in various kinds of ways, but not interested in seeing any harm come to the 7.2 million Jews who live there, as opposed to anti-Zionists who are in favor of just destroying the state and dismantling it, for which you don't necessarily have to condemn them for being anti-Zionists, you have to condemn them for being willing to wantonly consign 7.2 million people to death or homelessness.
Right, right.
And it's one thing when a college kid who knows nothing says that. It's not serious when a college kid says that. But when a respected Jewish intellectual says we should take apart the state of Israel, come on, it makes my blood boil. I have no patience for this nonsense.
Right.
7 million Jews, and you call yourself a concerned Jew, and you're willing to just dispense with the lives? What, we're going to turn them over to the PLO, to be the government of Israel? Come on. You can't do this. You can't speak like this. We've got, so there's anti-Zionism and there's anti-Zionism. To David's point, though, sometimes I thought you were being Mordechai Kaplan here. Mordechai Kaplan, in his book, A New Zionism, 1955, says the definition of Zionism is to work for the well-being of Judaism wherever Jews live.
If that's what you want to call Zionism, I'm all for that.
That's what he wants to call Zionism. So there you are.
Yeah. Got any more hands? Right. Yeah, here comes a mic. Okay.
So, Rabbi Samuels, as we face the immorality of children who are hungry just a mile from here, but we also have strong inclinations, Zionist inclinations, to help the needs and the suffering of people 6,000 miles from here. How do we go about prioritizing our response, and how do we have the bandwidth?
It's, yes, I'm going to give you the answer. No, I'm not, actually.
What's the right answer?
Yeah, exactly. I gave the example of the Bronx because it's an example of the immorality that is right up the street from us that we tolerate while telling ourselves a story about the kind of society that we live in, which doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human. And Israelis are also human. They're living with a bad story that's a mile from their homes, and they feel all the feelings that we feel. And we can't act like we are better than that as American Jews. So I would say, in terms of how we can be of service to all of these issues, I mean, I think it's like the best thing we have is Judaism, actually, which is making the demand on us at all times to be remembering those who don't have, remembering the stranger, remembering the orphan and the widow. And not only remembering, but actually creating a whole system of behaviors that enables us to deploy ourselves on a human scale towards the alleviation of the worst kind of suffering. And so, it really is true that, like, we're not going to complete the work, but we really still have to do it. And, one thing maybe that would help us is not to be at each other's throats quite as much, to say, like, how dare you care about the state of Israel when children in the Bronx are starving? How dare you dedicate your life to helping children in the Bronx when our brothers and sisters in Israel are suffering, or when children and adults in Gaza are suffering? That it's like our hearts have to be capacious enough to hold that our community is trying to move forward and do the very best we can within a very, very, very imperfect world that doesn't seem to be getting any more perfect any day soon.
You're reminding me of a text that has haunted me for a long time. It's in a medieval midrashic collection called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. I think you're studying it right now, which says that the fires of hell, the fires of Gehinnom, are right under a spring that is warmed by these waters and brings ta'anug livnei adam, brings pleasure to human beings. And this image of so many of the things that we are privileged to have are based on someone else's hell is something that is true in the Bronx, it's true in the Middle East, it's true everywhere on God's earth.
Yes.
And I think it just bolsters your point that it does no good to be deciding that we have the biggest priorities. It's impossible to do it all. The only thing that we can do is be aware of it and when the opportunity comes up for us, to be able to say, these are part of my values and I have to do something about it. I can't do it all, but I can't ignore it.
And in the name of Judaism.
In the name of Judaism. Look, younger Jews, look, I'll say it, Yishar Hess is here, he was the Mankal of the conservative movement, of the Masorti movement for years. We know that for decades, Israelis who I don't believe are different as human beings from anyone else in the world, they also have spiritual needs. They're not devoid of religious needs, but they looked at what religion was in Israel and they said, if that's religion, then I guess I'm not religious. And something like that has happened to our younger generations who didn't grow up with the Israel that we grew up with. They grew up with Bibi Netanyahu's Israel and Bezalel Smotrich's Israel and Itamar Ben-Gvir's Israel. So it's not so surprising if they say, if that's Zionism, then maybe I'm not a Zionist.
So let me just offer something.
So the idea is, is there some way to get Israel to own a little bit of this crisis?
We're talking about like two different things that are contradictory, and I know we're at time, but like we're saying American Jews really don't know about Israel. Like, some horrible percentage of people like don't care about Israel. And then we're like, but the problem is Bibi Netanyahu. And I want to say, like, both of those things can't be true at the same time, right? Like, some portion of, like, the people like us and our kids who grew up very steeped in this may have feelings that are strong enough about the current government of the State of Israel that it leads them to have very real, important questions that, to David's point, have to be honored and held. But, like, it can't be true that no one cares and no one's interested, and also it's Bibi.
No, you don't need a whole lot of drash. All you need is the pshat of the things that they say.
But how many people are saying them? Like, I feel like it's also like we're inside of a tiny little story that's our story. And I think that the masses of people out there maybe we don't know enough about them and what motivates them. It's like undecided voters. Like, you're like, really? Are you kidding me? But like, sure enough, there are tons of them.
So we don't have time, unfortunately, to get into the tachlis about how to do this. But let's just say, in Rashi Tevot, in headlines, the media is going to cover Bibi and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. The media is going to put pictures of Gaza.
Yes.
It's our job to let people know that hundreds of thousands of Israelis are doing amazing, wonderful, generous things every day. And we have to get that out, first of all, to Jews, so that young Jews should not think that the only Judaism there is Bibi and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. It's our job to get them acquainted with the real thing. So Birthright, which was billions of dollars of expense, did 10 days. It cost a fortune for the Jews to do that little bit, and to send every young kid to Israel for 6 months is going to cost even more fortune. And if we don't do that as a people, we're foolish.
Amen.
All right, look. I'm moving over here because these are our last moments with enormous thanks and gratitude to our panelists, but really to all of you and to everyone who has supported and helped work to make this happen.